was like putting her to sleep. Oh, do we?
Oh, interesting. Well, that was a huge part of the meeting we were talking about, actually, this afternoon. But the new programs that replaced it and how they were doing it.
We on?
We good?
All right. Good evening. I know, that was a little loud. Good evening. Welcome to the April 16th, 2015 Planning Commission meeting for the City of West Sacramento. Per tradition, we always start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and this evening I am going to pick Miss Bernadette Austin to lead us.
I pledge allegiance.
Thank you. Just a reminder, anyone who would like to address the commission on matters on the agenda or not, there are request to speak slips over on the side table. Please hand those to the clerk, Katie, and she will pass them to me. Thank you. As I have no request to speak on matters not on the agenda, we'll move on to correspondence and staff communications from the Planning Commission. Secretary, Mr. Tilley.
Yes, thank you, Chair Liebig. Two items to note for you this evening. First of all, in front of you, you should have a flyer, which is partially also an invitation to two upcoming community meetings being hosted by the proponents of the Liberty Specific Plan project. If any commissioners are interested in attending those, we would request that you communicate with us offline so we can discuss that for you to make sure that everything can go smoothly with that. And then secondly, tonight we would request on your regular agenda that we reverse the order tonight and take the traffic item up first and the habitat one second, if that would be okay with the commission. That concludes staff communications.
All right, well, why don't we take that item first, actually. There's a request to change the order of the agenda to move 3 in front of 2.
Move to approve that change in the agenda.
Moved by Commissioner Guerrero,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Austin. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Last item on the general admin section is disclosure of ex parte communication. This evening, we have two policy documents, but if anyone would feel otherwise obliged to disclose anything?
I feel obliged to share that I had a conversation with a resident on previous item 2, now item 3 on the agenda. So the YOLO Habitat Natural Communities Conservation Plan.
Okay.
I had a conversation with City Council Member Ledesma on the YOLO Habitat Natural Communities Conservation Plan.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to the consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman,
Mhm.
I have a comment on the minutes, and it's under the ex parte part. It may apply to others also, but when I did it, I designated that I talked to a couple of residents in the area and a couple of the people from the churches. And I don't know if this qualifies, I don't know what outside counsel means. I have mine on, but I must not be talking right. So anyway, I just like to note that for the record.
David, we usually do, I think you described this as an action type minutes where it's extremely brief and focuses on our action items.
Yeah, I do think perhaps we should reword outside counsel to say something like various parties.
Yeah,
Make that a
anything,
little more
yeah.
generic.
Okay,
That's my comment. I don't know if that applied to you and Bernadette or not. But I didn't talk to any counsel. I figure counsel's an attorney.
Yeah.
can you give me a minute? Mine actually may have been counsel. No, mine was not. Okay. So I think that would apply to mine, David.
Yeah, I think for bringing that up, Commissioner Moore.
With that, I'd make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Moore, seconded by Commissioner Guerrero. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Moving on to the regular agenda, which we have switched the order of. So starting with what is listed as item number 3, the public workshop on preliminary traffic findings for the general plan 2035. Mr. Tilley.
Yes, I'm going to provide some brief remarks on this, and then I'm going to ask John Long with DKS Associates, who's our transportation consultant on the general plan, who's going to provide a more detailed presentation on some of the more technical findings. But as the commission is well aware, we have been taking great lengths to update our general plan, looking out to 2035, and we've done various types of analyses on that. And one of the ones we have done most recently with assistance from John's firm is our overall long-term traffic analysis. And looking at 2035 and looking at our growth, what we're projecting in the general plan to 2035, it's perhaps not too terribly surprising that there are some problem areas from a traffic standpoint, and many of those are ones that you might expect if you were to just even look around our community, today. Many of them are on Jefferson, should come as not a surprise. Many intersections that do identify some problems, again, this is in the 2035 scenario, have some potential improvements that are relatively minor that could help bring those intersections back into acceptable levels. But there are some places where, barring some fairly significant improvements, that may not be possible. Also, what is the most critical aspect that has come out of this analysis circles around the Enterprise Bridge, and how the Enterprise Bridge could be something that we should consider more formally as a part of our long-term infrastructure plans. The Enterprise Bridge is in our current circulation element in the general plan, has been for many years. However, it has generally not been considered as a project in most of the traffic analyses we have done over the years, as a matter of a, a sort of a judgment call. It has not really not been something that has, even though we have right-of-way for it in the Southport area, and, everyone would agree that if it could be done, it would be a good thing. It hasn't been something that's necessarily been, put in the forefront compared to some of the other improvements we have considered and are actually working on currently, such as the other bridges over the Sacramento River. But tonight, we wanted to go over our findings for our analyses, and we want to talk about the Enterprise Bridge in more detail, because this work here, as it proceeds, and is going to be sort of the foundation for the general plan update EIR. And so as part of our efforts to do that and make sure we can deliver an EIR, for the Planning Commission's ultimate consideration and finally by City Council for the general plan, we want to make sure that this is the infrastructure and mitigation burdens in there, especially the big ticket items like bridges, are vetted up front so that, we can proceed with those assumptions in the EIR or go in a different direction should that be the ultimate case. So at this time, I'd like to ask John Long to come up and give his presentation, and then we can take questions of him and myself afterward, if that would please the commission.
There it is. Good evening. My name is John Long. I'm a principal with DCAS Associates. As David said, our task is to take the land use plan that city has for the general plan and evaluate the transportation system. It is a multimodal transportation system. I think we're going to talk more about traffic tonight, but we're taking very seriously all the other modes of transportation in the analysis. We're looking at a horizon year of 2035. This is not build out of the development within the city. This is a estimate that the city staff has been working hard with SACOG to prepare forecasts, levels of development for 2035. And so they've worked hard to get this down to a very detailed level so that we can use it in a travel demand model that's also very detailed. The consistency that we're trying to achieve is between not only the land use side, but also the transportation network that SACOG has been assuming in their update of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy, MTP-SCS. One of the first things we had to do was we created a new travel demand model for the city. What it really is taking the regional travel demand model that SACOG has and making it much more detailed within the city. We're using what's called the SAC-SIM model. It's a very state-of-the-art type of travel demand model. It starts at a parcel level. Everything starts down at land uses and mixes of land uses at a very fine-grained level. So it really does help you capture the walk and bike travel and how densities and mixes of uses can really benefit by reducing the amount of travel, reducing vehicle miles of travel on the roadway system. So if you have those type of uses, this model can capture that. And we made it as fine-grained as we could to help evaluate your transportation system. We had to validate that against transit ridership data and traffic count data that we collected over the last year. And we now have something that we can use to test the general plan over a longer period of time through 2035. The analysis is mostly focused on we call arterial and collector roadway systems, the major street system. This figure 1 that I'm showing here shows, in general sense, the daily traffic volumes on the existing roadway system. Gives you a rough idea by the width of the lines on there on how much traffic is on the various roadways. To give you a little bit more specifics, the highest volume you have is on Harbor, just south of US 50. That's about 42,000 cars a day. Jefferson, just south of US 50, has about 35,000 cars a day. By the time you get down south of Lake Washington Boulevard, Jefferson drops down to 20,000 cars a day. So that gives you an idea of the volumes there. Other high volumes are Reed Avenue up near I-80. It's about 25,000 cars a day. Lake Washington Boulevard near the Ship Canal is 21,000 cars a day, and Southport near Lake Washington Boulevard is about 16,000 cars a day. Gives you an order of magnitude. So, as I mentioned, we're talking about growth through 2035. This is just a real summary information here, this bar charts here, showing you growth in households and growth in employment, both north and south of the Ship Canal. We, again, have this in very fine-grained detail. I'm just doing this to give you an idea of the growth assumptions that are assumed in this analysis. It shows you that, north of the Ship Canal, the number of residential units is about doubling. And same thing with the employment, it's almost doubling. South of the Ship Canal, you have an increase from 7,000 to about 12,000 residential units, and a significant amount of employment growth from a couple thousand to over 12,000.
I'll save some questions for later, but could you tell me what is the data that you're referencing here?
The data we're referencing?
Yeah.
This is
For
the
employment.
assumptions that the city staff has worked together with SACOG to assume for the purposes of the general plan analysis.
Okay. So even the household and employment data?
Correct.
Okay.
And I'm summarizing this in a big picture level. The employment's broken down into many categories. The households are very detailed assumptions about demographics and so forth. So this is kind of just a high-level description of what we're assuming for the purpose of the analysis. The other end of this is what we're assuming for changes in the transportation system. There's a large increase in the number of transit service for the city, and that again is consistent with what SACOG is assuming for the funded constrained amount of transit service increase that would happen through 2035. What I'm showing on this diagram, though, is the roadway system. There are orange lines on there that show widenings to 4 lanes, and purple lines on there that show widening to 6 lanes. Those are consistent with what SACOG has in their Metropolitan Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategy. There are new roadways on there, including Village Parkway extension and the crossing of South River Road over the canal, which is now already in place, is shown on here as a new roadway, but all our traffic counts were done before the bridge was built, so it's shown as a new roadway. So the other thing that's on here is a series of dots just showing assumed improvements at intersections. These are not things that SACOG, gets into the every intersection improvement that would occur on a local roadway system. We're putting these on there because we've worked somewhat with city staff to say these are locations where you're going to need some level of improvements. That might be adding a right turn lane, adding a second left turn lane, or something of that magnitude that we think is feasible at these locations. And so we're showing it here because it's part of the assumptions we're using when we start talking about the congestion levels that result from the first cut of the 2035 analysis. So I want to quickly show you the daily traffic volumes projected in 2035. I think that the next slide gives you a, oops, back up on this. Can I back up? There we go. This slide here actually shows you the change in traffic volumes between today and 2035. I should say 2012 is the number on here because the base condition for the land use assumptions is 2012 in SACOG's numbers, so we're showing you growth between 2012 and 2035. The red on here is the roads that increase the most. Orange is the next level. Blue on here are new roadways. Those are roadways that are added from today. We do have both the Broadway Bridge and the replacement of the I Street Bridge assumed in this. We then have those roadway widenings and so forth that we were showing on the earlier slide. We get some fairly substantial increases on roadways. Lake Washington Boulevard increases by 23,000 cars a day at the Ship Canal to a volume of 44,000 cars. Southport increases by 18,000 just to the west of Lake Washington Boulevard to 34,000 cars a day. South River Road is up to 32,000 cars at the Ship Canal, which is it's a brand new roadway, but that's what's projected it would happen. And one of the key reasons is there's a constraint on Jefferson Boulevard, which is not assumed to be widened beyond its current 4 lanes, and its volume increases by only about 8,000 cars a day as it crosses the Ship Canal. So it's a constrained roadway today, and it's what the model is predicting is that a lot of that growth is going to happen on the other existing bridges. This slide here, a little hard to read, but it's showing you the levels of service, traffic levels of service at major intersections throughout the city. As you can see on here, there are a series of intersections that would operate at E or F level condition in 2035 under this baseline that we're evaluating. Some of those, we listed some that were greater than 120 seconds because those are ones that are well into level service F. We wanted to highlight those that have very high levels of delay. We'll come back to a little bit more to this, but it does show that there are some key intersections that are not surprising, like Jefferson near US 50 and the Tower Bridge Gateway near the Tower Bridge. Those are places I think you would expect with the levels of growth that we're talking about, especially in the Bridge District and so forth, that you would expect. But we also have some very significant traffic congestion in the Southport area along Jefferson Boulevard and Lake Washington. Now, let me talk a little bit about the city's level of service policy. The current level service policy is level service C with exceptions to level service D when you are within a quarter mile of either a freeway interchange or a bridge crossing. Now, staff has had discussions with City Council about this subject, and at this point, the general direction is that level service E would be allowed in certain areas, which I'll show you in a second, and level service C would still be the standard, except for level service D acceptable within a quarter mile of freeway interchanges. Now, this diagram here shows you an area where level service E policy is being considered for the general plan. It would include Pioneer Bluff, the Bridge District, Washington, and the West Capitol Corridor. So that was an area that's right now being considered as part in the general plan to allow level service E policy. Now, as you may know, that there is changes in state law. SB 746 is one that is being saying that level service is may not be considered as a CEQA impact going forward. But the city still has this as a policy, and it's still something that is a general plan analysis. We still have to evaluate whether it's considered a CEQA impact or not. So we're evaluating this and pointing out where it conflicts with the policy. Some key conclusions. Again, we're starting out with some feasible intersections improvements assumed in this as a starting point. is that citywide, 10 intersections would not meet the current level service policy, and 9 intersections would not meet the potential policy. You have a few intersections that are in the areas that are level service E consideration, but they're actually would operate at a level service F. You have also some locations that are outside the allowance for level service D that are away from, they're not close to a bridge or a freeway interchange. We operate in a D or E condition. So one of the key things that we started talking to staff about was that while there are going to be challenges of trying to make improvements in your areas like the Bridge District, when we get to the Southport area, you have some options to avoid excessive congestion. And that's why we started talking about the Enterprise Bridge. At the intersection of Lake Washington and Southport Parkway, we have level service F conditions projected. And even if we talk about some pretty dramatic improvements there, like triple left turns and double right turns and so forth in all directions, we still can't achieve get out of level service F. So, you know, one consideration would be to grade separate that intersection, to create some sort of a, you know, mini interchange or some grade separation there. That's been considered by other communities. They sometimes put it on their general plan, and then later on they figure out that, well, it's not consistent with the type of character they want in their community, and often those go away. I could name several communities in the region that have done that, and then later on decided that that wasn't in their interest and ended up going back to at-grade improvements and look for other ways to mitigate or to just accept level service F conditions at those locations. However, there's a little bit of a different option that the city could consider, and that is the Enterprise Bridge, because that is on your general plan, but it has not been discussed as something to be considered prior to 2035. This diagram here shows a projection of traffic that would occur with the Enterprise Bridge. It would carry more than 20,000 cars a day, even as a two-lane facility on the bridge and widening on both the north and south end to accommodate the intersections that you need at both Interstate 80 and down at Southport. But it can function very well with that type of geometry. It takes traffic off of Lake Washington at the Ship Canal by about the same amount, about 20,000 cars a day. What it does is it says that you don't need to widen Industrial and the bridge at Lake Washington to 6 lanes if you put in the Enterprise Bridge. This next diagram right here actually shows the change in volumes that would occur. The red is in volumes, the red and orange is increase in volumes, the green is decreases in volumes, the blue is a new roadway, which is the Enterprise Bridge. As I said, there's a pretty dramatic shift in traffic from Southport and Lake Washington and Industrial and Harbor over to Enterprise. And this shows you the widenings and improvements that were assumed in this. And as you can see, we have a short section of 6-lane widening assumed between Jefferson and Southport, but no longer a widening to the north of that point through on Industrial on up to Harbor. The intersection improvements would not be as dramatic on some of these intersections as well. We wouldn't need the same level of improvement to achieve an acceptable level of service. So this is a resulting level service diagram. You don't get yourself completely out of issues along Jefferson and Lake Washington Boulevard, but they're considerably better, much lower delay than what was projected under the without Enterprise Bridge, the base case. So the basic conclusions we had was that putting the Enterprise Bridge in is an expensive improvement, but it reduces the number of improvements needed on Industrial Boulevard and Lake Washington Boulevard. It substantially reduces delay and level service at some major intersections. It provides another crossing of the Ship Canal, which would be another emergency access route to Southport. And it really does provide a very good truck and goods movement access to the Southport plan area. The reason that this congestion is occurring is that you have growth there that is not only residential growth in Southport, but also a dramatic increase in employment growth along Southport. And so you have traffic in both directions, all hours of the day. So that's just a brief summary of our analysis, both on the general plan and specifically on this subject. Staff asked us to come and, present this to you, and I'm open for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative, and I particularly like the foresight that went into the Enterprise Bridge concept, not only because it takes traffic off of Harbor, as you say, which is an intersection that's going to clog up easily if it's not clogging up now. It also takes traffic off of Jefferson, and those are two primary routes into Southport. So I think it was a great idea to include this. It also relieves congestion around our freeway exits, which is beginning to back up. So I think all around, a very good idea. I think I'll point to commissioners first to see if they have any direct questions of staff or Mr. Long. I'll look on my right this time.
I don't know, it's hard to do this. We looked at Enterprise Bridge before. Does it still need to be the high bridge, David?
Who knows what the world will be like in 2035, but, we're, just have to assume for now that you are talking about some type of bridge that will still allow for ship traffic under it, be it one that flies over or is somehow movable. But, for, tonight's purposes, we don't want to pretend that this bridge, it wouldn't be something that would be very expensive. But, the exact type of bridge of it isn't really critical right now.
Well, the last time we looked at it, I think the bridge had to be the very high bridge because you had to be able to get all the ships underneath it. And that was our only option 10, 15, 20 years ago, whenever the heck we looked at it. So I remember that, and then we talked about maybe there was a way to have one that we could raise and get a ship through it. So, I think that's an interesting concept. I'm not sure that I agree with the traffic numbers because I know you look at me, I don't have a clue in the world how to do this, but you guys arbitrarily can come up with numbers. And I think that if you put in the Enterprise Bridge and you have the Parkway going on to South River Road, I think you'll dramatically reduce traffic off of Jefferson Boulevard. And I only believe that because I think people go to the less impacted routes. And so while I'll never be here 35 years from now, I just think that if we could get these type of things implemented, I think we will do exactly what you said. Mainly, we will reduce traffic, but I think we'll even reduce it at a lesser level. And Jefferson won't be as impacted because people will use these alternative routes. Just my 2 bits worth, and it's worth about that much. But I think the whole overall idea of what you came up with is really substantial, and it shows the effect of what will happen and what could happen, and particularly the impacts in the down by Tower Bridge and stuff, because that seems to be a real impacted area down there. So I don't know that I have any other comments than that, but I do think this is a great way to get started with.
Andrew, do you have any comments, questions?
Just one. I'm wondering if we looked at comparing the prioritization of this bridge versus the Broadway Bridge or any of the other potential, obviously not the C Street Bridge, because I think that's a moving project, but some of the other bridges that have been discussed crossing either Sacramento River or other, I guess that's the Sacramento River, or all the other bridge projects have been discussed. I'm just wondering if we've done a similar analysis to say, putting the Broadway Bridge would have this impact versus putting the Enterprise Bridge would have this impact, to be able to create some kind of apples to oranges comparison.
Yeah, we're obviously right now working on both the C Street Bridge and the Broadway Bridge. The C Street Bridge will probably be the first one that will come to life. And then Broadway, after that. Those have both been in the MTP, for some time now. Enterprise Bridge is really kind of a different animal, because, it doesn't cross the river. It is much more localized. So, the primary thrust of what we're discussing tonight, and also what we discussed at the Transportation and Mobility Infrastructure Commission last week, is about doing just as you said, is, we need to be starting getting serious about doing the Enterprise Bridge. We don't need to build it, for quite some time. Those other two bridges will likely be in place, before we even need to do this bridge. But we can't wait until 2030 to start, getting going on the feasibility of this bridge. So what will happen is, I think this bridge will trail and will assume that those other two bridges are in place, as we're analyzing now. And then you'll have, this bridge will be layered on top of that. But really, these are kind of different areas. Those are other neighborhood bridges, also trying to get connectivity across the river. So this will probably be the last bridge that would come in after those two. But what we're finding here is that this bridge would likely have significant benefit, and that we need to start getting serious about it now, because it will take a long time for it to come to fruition.
No, I appreciate that. I think, to be clear, I think the concept is totally in line with where we should be going, how we should be thinking about connectivity in our city. And I think that I like it so much, that's why I'm wondering, from, prioritization of all these, cross-way, new connections we're looking, whether it's across the Sacramento or within our own community, have we looked at if this is a bigger priority for our community than creating another connection with the city of Sacramento?
Jason, do you have any input on this particular topic?
How you doing, Commissioners? Jason McCoy, Public Works Department. I'm also the project manager for the Broadway Bridge project. So as far as prioritization goes, I'm sure you are aware that there was a river crossing study done that was adopted in 2011 between both the City of Sacramento and West Sacramento. Obviously, that focused on the Sacramento River, not Enterprise Bridge, which, as David was saying, has been in the general plan for some time. The crossings as well have also been planned for a significant amount of time. The C Street and Rail Yards Bridge, the replacement of the I Street Bridge, has actually been funded by the Highway Bridge Program as a replacement to the existing I Street Bridge. So that definitely is going to be moving forward first. You're going to be seeing that come online about 2025, somewhere around there. The Broadway Bridge, we have received SACOG funding for the feasibility study, which is currently in progress. We've also received a grant from the Tiger 6 program for a $3 million, $1.5 million from Tiger, $750,000 from each city to proceed with the environmental document phase of that. So the next phase, we still have to look for money in order to proceed with that. That is a stated priority of both councils for Sacramento and City of West Sacramento. Whether or not we change that priority would be up to the City of Sacramento or West Sacramento. However, with funding already in the pipeline, I don't foresee that change in direction would be happening. But again, that's up to our City Council. What we're looking at with this bridge is starting the planning now and the programming so that down the road, we can actually start taking steps to do the feasibility study, the environmental document phase, the project report, preliminary engineering, right-of-way. So that process takes a significant amount of time. Broadway Bridge, we're looking at about 2030, that you may see that online, depending on funding, how long it takes to get that in place. If we start now, we could feasibly, say, in a perfect world, and we get a lot of grant money coming in, say we get another Tiger grant, we could see this project around 2030, 2035. So that's if we started planning at this phase. So it's one of those situations where it being a priority for seeing the traffic improvements and the mobility of the city stay at the policy level that we're looking for, start planning now, otherwise down the road it just delays that process.
Thank you. I'm a little bummed to hear about the timeline for the C Street Bridge. I thought we were a little bit farther along. Were you done, Andrew?
Well, I just want, if I can wrap up
Okay.
and respond to the comments. I totally understand that, conceptually, there's benefits and a project can move faster when we have partners on both sides of the river who are investing in it and are on board with it. So I'm not disseminating that point at all. I am curious to know, and this might believe my final question, is will part of the feasibility study that we're doing for the Broadway Bridge take a look at the traffic impacts of actually building the bridge? Or is the feasibility study focused around just the feasibility of the infrastructure costs around building the bridge? So I apologize to make you get back up. And thank you for your time.
Problem. So I'm here. So the feasibility study that's taking place right now is going to look at preliminary traffic impacts and overall preliminary environmental impacts associated with development of bridge. So it will take a look at what is the overall traffic pattern, how does it interface with overall with the city and also the city of Sacramento. Once we start getting into the next phase, which is preliminary engineering, we're going to really start nailing down what do lane configurations look like? What kind of changes do we need to make to either the Sacramento side or West Sacramento side in order to accommodate the streetcar, to accommodate truck traffic, transit, bike and ped movements, especially in light of the city of Sacramento, who's actually doing a road diet over on the other side down Broadway and trying to make it more of a complete street. So that all is going to have to be looked at, and that's probably going to be kicking off in the environmental phase, and that's going to be 2016. So you're going to look at January 2016, and then over the course of the next 24 to 28 months after that. So we'll start having some outreach meetings probably around mid-2016 to late 2016 that the public will be able to get involved in that and put in their input on everything from traffic to environmental impacts to bridge design.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, it's up to you.
Thank you. Dave, a question about considering the possibility of growth impact on the west side of Southport if the Enterprise Bridge were to become a reality. It looks like it sort of dumps right into the northwest part of Southport. Any effect there on what we could expect in the way of development pressure there?
Well, much of that area where the bridge sort of would land is in Southport Business Park, which is, a long-term plan. It goes back to 1983, master plan even from the county days. And, that's, fully entitled and is building out rapidly right now. It's quite possible that business park, could be pretty well built out even by this 2035 bridge scenario. One of the things that we feel is very important about this bridge is that business park does appear to be building out primarily with distribution facilities. So you have a tremendous amount of truck volume going through there, and trucks are worth, 4 to 5 cars, a piece. So giving those trucks a much more direct route, to the freeway, which is where all of them are either coming from or going to, we think could be advantageous, not only just purely from a traffic standpoint, but if you think about if it's, that much less driving they have to do, is that much more wear on pavement, which is costly. It's just that much more emissions. We estimated that from the intersection of Southport Parkway and Promenade to get to the freeway over the Enterprise Bridge or going the regular way up to Harbor, that way, it's about a mile, shorter. But I think as John mentioned, this is 20,000 cars a day going that way. So that's, 20,000, VMT, every day that, we could, write off, so to speak, if we had this bridge in place. I think that is, these are the other factors that we don't always talk about when we talk about traffic. We usually just talk about, well, level of service and things. But, less miles driven is very desirable from other standpoints as well. Not the least of which, again, is the impact and wear and tear on roads. And so, so this, the western area is industrial. Even though John mentioned that we're not, this is not full build out of our community, it's moving its way there. This is probably about another 30,000 people on top of what we have now, which is about 50,000, roughly. So we actually believe that the development and growth is coming, especially also in Seaway, so that, this bridge can actually help accommodate that growth rather than create it.
So is there any residential zoning along this corridor at all?
The enterprise corridor? No. It's, all the residential is existing, planned areas north of the bridge. It's all industrial. And it lands right in the middle of the business park, which is primarily industrial.
Thank you.
Anybody?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah,
Okay.
I have comments. Brett always has comments. So thank you for the report. If the feedback is whether we think that, the commission should give a blessing to doing some additional study on a potential enterprise bridge, by all means, that's fine by me. One of my concerns is I just feel like this report, at least what I've read and what's been presented today, doesn't seem to capture intuitively some of the kind of residential and commercial demographic factors that I think need to be considered. I'm really glad that Commissioner Sternfels brought up the issue of the other river crossings. But again, this is speaking intuitively, but this is grounded in information. Intuitively, my sense is that the majority of our growth of VMTs is going to come from residential. Even our commercial, if I had to guess, the commercial and industrial, like we're talking about, you may be taking up a lot of space in the Southport Business Park, but I don't see, pound for pound, warehouses generating as many vehicle trips as, say, an office park of similar size. So that's just intuitively the sense that I get. With residential, where I see a lot of the traffic coming from is from home to employer and then household trips. Household trips generally are going to happen within the given area, so generally within Southport or within the north part of town, when you go get your groceries and pick up your kids from school. But also intuitively, the majority of people I know are employed in Sacramento County. The majority of them downtown or Central City. As far as enterprise goes, I see this potential bridge serving convenience for employers, particularly heavy and light industry, and not so much for office industry or for residential. And I don't know if that's going to continue to be a growth area in Northwest Southport. I do potentially see it north along the port area. I can see that. I see there's a lot of potential for growth there, but I don't see huge amounts of demand in this particular area. So I'm supportive of us doing studies, that's fine, but I do feel like there's an opportunity for us to use our resources to do studies in areas that I think are going to see much more growth and much more impact over the next just decade, just the immediate decade ahead of us. And I do think that Village Parkway is a big area. The areas that we highlighted with potential levels, what was it, D and E or E and F or whatever, I think that the Village Parkway area, even just talking about the Liberty development, but the Village Parkway area and the area along the proposed streetcar route, I think that's where you're going to really see, I would like to see us making sure that if those areas have been studied or we've been able to put resources towards those, then that staff is comfortable with, then I'm fine supporting additional studies of enterprise. But those are just my couple of cents.
Okay.
Wasn't
thank
a
you.
comment, which is a comment, no questions.
Parveen, did you have any comments?
Sure, just briefly. Thank you again for your report, and thank you to staff for your presentation as well. Just to kind of follow up with Commissioner Austin's comments, I live in that area, and I kind of agree with her. There is, I work in San Francisco. I don't go in every day, but when I do go in, there's a really big backup on Industrial. The stoplight's not bad. I'll get through it the first time, every time, no matter what time I leave. But to make a right, I think it's Del Monte, when you're making a right from Industrial to get onto the highway, that's backed up pretty far. And sometimes it's backed up all the way to the Palmadesi Bridge. There's nobody on Southport, though. That traffic is coming from Lake Washington. I feel like that traffic's coming from, that area right behind Nugget, or on the other side of Jefferson, across from Nugget. So I'm inclined to agree with Commissioner Austin, and if there's no additional residential planning out there, I would support Commissioner Austin's suggestion that we look into studies for other areas, for traffic points that are closer and towards the commute towards the Sacramento area.
David, since we're talking about this, could you possibly mention the Southport Parkway on the east side, the connection to the New Magellan Bridge, and how that may address Parveen's comment or concerns there?
Well, Village Parkway, will be, right now, the McGowan Bridge is in place, but, it stops there at Locks Drive. This summer, we'll start the connection to the existing Village Parkway, and so that's about just a 0.4 of a mile connection. So now Village Parkway will take you over the ship channel, over the New McGowan Bridge, and into Pioneer Bluff. The flood program actually will also build an interim version of Village Parkway south of where it stops right now at Lake Washington Boulevard, all the way down through the rest of the east side of Southport and around the bottom and across the Clarksburg Trail and connecting in actually at Gregory. So that'll be an interim version of Village Parkway, but it'll be, substantially the alignment that we'll have in the future. We definitely expect that will be a busy road, but all of the studies we have done over the years, even going back to the supercumulative days of the mid-2000s, showed that those roads tend to pick up more traffic as Jefferson starts to, get busier and people divert. One of the things that's changed, though, is, we also weren't expecting to build the McGowan Bridge or Village Parkway this soon. Those were like third phase improvements in, like, for example, in the River Park project. They were going to build, 2/3 of their project out before they even were going to need Village Parkway. So a lot has changed from our prior thinking because these improvements are going in much sooner than what we've ever expected.
So I guess a short answer, what I was hoping to hear was, will we see, once that opens up, will we see a shift in traffic away from Industrial, away from the Lowe's Center, especially if the cars are coming from the area behind Nugget?
John?
I love how the
Who lives
neighborhood's
back
gotten
there?
named.
I can't necessarily confirm that that's where the car's coming from.
I'll confirm that that's where we're coming from.
We'll back up to this diagram here, whether you have Enterprise Bridge or you don't have Enterprise Bridge in, we see some very heavy traffic using the New McGowan Bridge. We see over 30,000 cars a day on that bridge in 2035. Village Parkway and that connection in there is going to be very heavily utilized. It's with or without an Enterprise Bridge. It is a critical element to this, as well as the Broadway Bridge. We did not assume the Broadway Bridge, and that all traffic has to get to the Pioneer Bridge or to the Tower Bridge. You'd have much higher capacity problem issues along all your roadways in that area. So, the good news is that we're talking about, having the Broadway Bridge in as a given for the general plan. We're talking about the McGowan Bridge already being in place. that, and even with those, we already have talked to city staff about some of the connections between the Broadway Bridge, like 15th Street by itself is going to be an issue. So we're talking to them about a second connection, which right now is constrained because there's a railroad in the way. So, but if that railroad line is abandoned, which is what the city's working on, then another connection could be possible from the Broadway Bridge over to Jefferson, and it's going to be needed. So I think we focused a lot on the Enterprise Bridge tonight, but we're talking about a whole variety of things that are needed for the other parts of and residential corridors that are feeding up to Highway 50 and the bridges that are going to be needed, and even with those, there's going to be challenges. But I think tonight's presentation, we put a little bit more spotlight on this Enterprise Bridge, but it's not our focus of the analysis. I think it's a lot of it's going to be on the other corridors.
Ms. Guerrero, do you have any comments, questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much for your presentation and the report. I've been a resident here for a while, and seen, where we were when I first moved in and where we are today, and how long it takes to commute on various times of the day. Earlier morning being really tough. Later in the morning, it's a lot easier. But early morning, when it's pretty congested and families are trying to get, to school and work and, just to get to where their destination is, I think, I can sense there's a lot of stress. Even in the bus transportation, my impression is that they are also having a difficult time getting through with the heavy commute during those times of day. So I really appreciated the thoughtful analysis that came into putting this together and drawing some, ideas from us as to what we can do to take a look at this in the future, and the forethought of bringing this particular bridge study before us so that we can, contribute some feedback in taking a look at what we can do to alleviate that traffic, as we move forward, and also providing the residents an opportunity to, feel that the city is, analyzing this and trying to address where we're going in the future. And so looking at the data and seeing that we really need to make some decisions soon today. And so I'm glad that that's what we're working on as we're moving forward. Appreciate my fellow commissioners' feedback on, what are the other bridge ideas. And, that, also came into the back of my mind. But thinking as a resident, could this be an exit way for me if I'm rushed, if I know that one particular direction is going to be more congested? And my answer was, yeah. If it'll get me out of the city a lot faster, I think I'm going to use this longer path to get out. If it'll get me out a little quicker and avoid all the other traffic, because I come from that Southport area in town. And thinking about, what it could it alleviate other, traffic from Marshall going on to Jefferson? It might, I don't know. I think looking at the study and, taking, some of what we had said today and bringing it together and moving forward with, assessing this in the future, I think is a great idea. So, yeah, I would recommend, moving along, and, it'll get us probably sooner to deciding maybe this isn't the best idea. But it'll also get us to be strategically positioned for future grant opportunities. And, at least one of the assets that our city has is that we do have that forethought, and it puts us ahead of other cities that are going to be experiencing growth too. I mean, it's an opportunity for, folks, as our economy is improving, to better position ourselves and capture that grant funding in the future. So I, want to say that this is thumbs up on my end.
Thank you. I think we heard a lot of positive comments, some concerns specifically that the report may focus on industrial traffic rather than residential. I think anything to get the trucks off of Jefferson and Harbor would benefit residential drivers or people going to and from their work. Anything to improve those streets should probably be looked at. And I think Enterprise is the logical next step in that, as we've got McGowan, we've got Jefferson, we've got Industrial Harbor. So, it is the logical, I think, next step. I would like to just comment on our mobility element, which we've recently commented on. And for that, I think that is possibly going to dictate that this should be a movable bridge. Because if it is not movable, then we are not looking at multimodal transportation across it. I'm not a fan of grade separation, as for the same exact reason. We are looking at improving our mobility around the city, not just with vehicle traffic. So just keeping these things in mind. This evening, we were focused on level of service, and I understand that it's still policy, but we're moving towards guidelines, maybe, rather than policies. It won't be a CEQA component anymore, and I think it's going to be a positive, or have a positive effect on our city and how we do that analysis. That is, one more thing. Still on the mobility, any increase of lanes to 6-lane roads really needs to be carefully considered, because that is, you're approaching freeway width here, which deters any sort of pedestrian traffic, bicycle traffic. So those sort of things need to be looked at carefully, in my opinion. So those are my comments. Since I didn't have any requests to speak from the public, I will go ahead and close the public comment period. And turn it back to David. David, did you get what you needed from?
Yeah, I would,
commission
yes,
this evening?
I would actually seek a formal vote from the commission on the recommendation to the city council, since we will, after tonight, we will proceed to the next council meeting on this topic.
Sure.
Okay.
So you want us to move the recommendation forward through a vote? then?
Yes.
Okay, so
Please.
I move that we recommend that the city consider planning for the Enterprise Boulevard Bridge as a potential alternative to other significant traffic improvements on Southport Parkway, Lake Washington Boulevard, Industrial Boulevard, and Harbor Boulevard.
Well, I'll second it. That's pretty rare for me to second. But it was moved by Ms. Guerrero, seconded by myself. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Recommendation made.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next item on the agenda is a public workshop on the second administrative draft of the Yolo Habitat Conservation Plan and Natural Community Conservation Plan. And this will be presented by Ms. Hamilton.
Yes.
Hi, Charlene. Welcome back.
Good evening, Chair Liebig and members of the commission. Is this mic working?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I know last night there was a little bit of trouble with the microphones. So yes, I am here before you tonight to present the second administrative draft of the Yolo Habitat Conservation and Natural Communities Conservation Plan. As some of you may know, conservation planning in Yolo County has been in the works for over 20 years. In around 2002, the member agencies in Yolo County got much more serious about developing a habitat conservation plan. Even though we've been working on it for quite some time now, the county, through the general plan policies and just through sort of how they've managed the land in the county and in the cities, have been able to achieve over 60,000 acres in existing open space and agriculture that is protected. Unfortunately, it's not formally managed. Most of it's not formally managed. And so that was really the objective behind everybody getting together and working on a formal plan, is we have some great resources, but we really need to bring it together in a managed plan. So tonight, I'm going to go through a little bit of background, since this has been in the works for quite some time. I'm going to highlight some things that the Environment and Utilities Commission weighed in on Monday night. So their focus, when I presented this to them Monday evening, was to give feedback, give recommendations to the City Council on the environmental policies contained in the plan. Your role tonight is going to be more to give feedback to the City Council and to staff on sort of the implementation policies in the plan, how it will affect development applications that come before the Planning Commission, and how the city will manage the plan being a permittee under the plan. So with that, any questions just kind of on the role of the Planning Commission with respect to this plan before I jump in on the background?
One of my comments was actually regarding the environmental part.
Well,
So-
it's not that you can't comment on it. I mean, you know, if we start really going down the path of digging into all the environmental, I'll probably say, you know, the Environmental Utilities Commission and prior Ag and Natural Resources Commissions have already given significant input on that.
On a policy perspective, I'm going to have an environmental comment.
Okay.
So,
Duly noted. All right, so the timeline. Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma, who's also the chairman of the YOLO Habitat JPA, was not able to be here tonight, but he wanted me to emphasize the timeline. Because we have been working on it so long, and because the JPA has already committed to a schedule for which we are allowed to review, and I brought this just so you would know exactly how large the document is, and this is double-sided, by the way, the whole thing. So it's very large, and I know we got it on the afternoon of March 31st. We turned it around as quickly as we could to get it out to you guys. Even today, I don't expect that you have all read it, the entire thing. I'm still working on going back and rereading sections to prepare comments. But he did want me to emphasize the timeline. It's not something that's really movable at this point. So do your best to try to give us some feedback if you can. So up in the upper left, March, April 2015, that is the release of the document that we're talking about tonight. And then the comments that we have to turn in to the JPA board by May 29th, that's going to be used to help make changes if necessary, and also to refine things for the public review draft, which will be released in August, September 2015. And so that then is going to lead into preparation and release of the draft EIS/EIR in July, August 2016, as well as the actual full public release of the Habitat Conservation Plan and NCCP. Then December 2016, January 2017, that's when they'll be delivering the environmental document and the final draft of the plan, with the hope that the wildlife agencies will be able to issue the final permits by April, May 2017. So that's kind of the timeline for the finalizing of this plan and hopefully the issuance of permits. Oops. So a little overview of the plan. The proposed plan is going to conserve about a little over 28,000 acres. Of that, currently the negotiations with the wildlife agencies, that will include a credit for 8,000 acres of existing, already protected, conserved land. The plan includes 12 covered species, and I'll go into more detail on the species in the following slides. Originally, the plan that was released back in 2013, the first administrative draft, that included 32 species. That plan also was at a prior cost of $504.7 million to implement. This plan has been reduced in cost with the reduction of covered species down to a little under $300 million. The term of the permit is currently at 50 years. And there's a split between what comes from mitigation of projects and then what comes from conservation. And you can see from this slide that mitigation is the bulk of the cost of the plan over the life of the permit. And the city of West Sacramento is by far the largest contributor to the mitigation. We will have the most development compared to the other 3 cities in the county. So as we reduce the number of species, the advisory committee and the board over the last year, they weren't necessarily lost. They were transitioned into a strategy that's referred to as the local conservation strategy. That is it has a placeholder in Appendix E of the plan. But you'll note if you got that far in your reading, that there's a slip sheet in there that said that will be produced in the future. So I have seen a draft of it. It has, at the last draft I saw, it had at least 42 species of local concern. The thought behind that is, while trying to right-size the plan in Yolo County, to make it something that's feasible to implement, because that is a finding that both wildlife agencies have to make in order to approve the permit, is they have to make a finding that the plan is actually feasible to implement. We found that a lot of the species of local concern, they benefited even from these 12 species. So if we work at conserving these 12 species that are in this plan, these other species of local concern will benefit from that, because they share the same, a lot of the same habitat coverage requirements, and/or they use the same ecological corridors. Oops, I keep going the wrong way on this. Okay. So this is a figure from Chapter 1. This is Figure 1-2, Yolo County, the Yolo County boundary. Where's my arrow here? There we go. So the gray shaded areas are the cities. And our area here, West Sacramento, you'll note that our gray shaded area is consistent with our existing city boundary. We are not proposing any growth outside of the city boundary for this plan. If there were to be any growth in the future outside, and we were still within the 50-year permit term, that would have to be either an amendment to the plan, or that particular project would have to go and seek its own individual project permit. Note that City of Davis is on here as well, and that's their area. And again, the gray is the area they're anticipating growth in and/or existing. Woodland is here, and then Winters is down here in this corner. The crosshatched area is the area proposed for the conservation reserve area. And in a later slide, I'll show you kind of where some of these species are occurring, and there's a correlation as to why this area was picked and why the woodland and hill area is not within that conservation reserve area. Primary reason there is that no development is really expected to occur in that area.
Charlene, I'm sorry, I can't see the crosshatch. Can you tell us what numbers the area are, or?
Okay, so number 12, number 13, number 5, number 10, number 11, 7, 19. It's basically, see this line right here?
Yeah, okay, I see it now.
It's everything east of that is the entire proposed conservation reserve area.
Great, thank you.
So this is a slide that is depicting sort of what the baseline public and easement lands currently are. So when I talked about that there was already conservation occurring in Yolo County, this slide is showing you where those areas are. And it also shows you what category. So the category 1, which is the darkest color green on this, category 1 is lands that are conserved and have management. Primary management goal is related to ecological protection. So some of these already have, these are like the baseline protected lands. A lot of them are in the Yolo bypass. I believe Conway Ranch falls into this category. So they do have easements on them. Category 2 is this color here. So it's sort of the medium green. And that has about a little over 53,000 acres. Those are lands that are being managed, but they don't have an irrevocable conservation mandate over the top of them. And then there is category 3, which is primarily public open space. And they don't really necessarily have a mandate, a conservation mandate over them, or they don't have a formal management plan. So these are sort of the categories where when they go to apply conservation dollars and go after, they're going to start going after some of these that are, say, partially conserved at this point, because that will be the lowest hanging fruit before they go and purchase new lands and create new conservation areas. So they're going to start with these first. And some of the credits are coming from this. So the 8,000 in credits, some of that is coming from some of these lands. So any questions on this one before I move on? So covered activities is an actual defined term in the plan. These are the activities whereby could take a development or an agency doing a project, so it could be a public project or a private project, could be covered by this permit if they are doing any one of these activities. So it's urban development, it's our infrastructures and roadways improvements, some agricultural facilities, barns and things. The county did put in the aggregate mining that is already occurring on Cache Creek. Ongoing operation and maintenance on any of these. So our roadways would be covered, flood protection would be covered. And then also the implementation of the plan itself has to be listed as a covered activity, because even new conservation and new restoration can impact an existing land. I would note in here that the covered activities for port improvements does not include any in-water improvements. That is something that was a conscious decision made quite some time ago to not include any in-water improvements in this plan. So if the port, say, decided they wanted to do significant dredging, that is something they would have to go and get a permit on their own. And that's kind of how they've operated anyway, since they've existed.
Since that was my comment, can you explain why that was a conscious decision? And the reason I'm asking is because there's some interest in potentially doing some habitat improvements within the port area for some different goals, without going into details.
For the
which
wetland
could
area?
What's that?
You're talking about for the wetland area on Seaway?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we're currently working on, the port's currently working on getting a formal delineation of that wetland. But the in-water ones that we're talking about, the barge canal, the deep water ship channel, and the Sacramento River, it was done some time ago. Most of the people that were involved, I mean, this probably goes way back to the year 2000, or I'm not quite sure. But my understanding is the conscious decision to not have in-water, and therefore there's no fish listed as covered species. And since I've been involved in this plan, even back when there was 42 covered species being entertained, there never were any fish on the list, is because fish are costly and time-consuming to conserve. They move around a lot. Sometimes they go quite far. And for the most part, we've said, you know, we're really not going to be doing a lot of development. So many things have changed post-Katrina that we're not going to be doing like any new marina or this or that. And this plan already had right-sizing problems, even when we didn't have any fish listed. And so we just thought it would be basically infeasible. And so that's why we've excluded in-water improvements, and don't have any fish listed. So
Okay.
those would be separate permits.
So the port would simply go for separate permits for any in-water work or improvements that they'd want to do. Or if they wanted to, say, open up the locks again for some reason.
Now, the wetland on Seaway, that is included in this. We do have that included but we have it included more as, there could be slight disturbance of the wetland, in which case there would have to be a restoration, and they would pay the fee associated with that. But the priority really is to avoid and minimize wetland disturbance. And we do have a few areas in the city. The Port Seaway is not the only area that has a potential small little wetland.
Okay. If you don't mind, no, keep going then. Going back to that map, you don't have to put it back up, but one of the areas for conservation is on the bypass. So if the conservation plan is actually assessing itself, I'm not sure that's a way to say it, but if you're going to do work on the bypass, you actually have to consider fish, because it's a major floodway and considered critical habitat for many listed species.
Yeah, so the bypass is covered by the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and they have fish listed.
Okay.
So there's a significant overlap between, in that area, between this plan and the YOLO plan. And that was an issue paper that was brought by the advisory committee, and that is something that is being negotiated between both plans and the wildlife agencies as to who's going to be responsible for what. And so that's being worked out, and I don't have all the details of that negotiation.
That's not so much, that part's not so much a policy part, because that would be the implementation of mitigation, whereas I was more concerned about the port and activities with the port and making sure that we're covered there. But it would just mean separate permitting.
Yes.
So, thank you.
Oops,
Plus, I had to say something
keep
about
going the
fish.
wrong way.
Can't take you anywhere.
How often do we get to talk about fish in here?
Okay, here is the 12 covered species. And I have pictures of these, if you want me to show them. But if not, I'll just keep moving. So we have one plant, palmate bract bird's beak. That is not a plant that exists in the city of West Sacramento. That's actually over in the, I believe, southeastern area of Woodland. I'll come to a map that'll show you kind of the disbursement and occurrences of these species in the next slide. Valley elderberry longhorn beetle, we do have several of their habitat bushes in the city. So that's the only invertebrate we have. We do have one amphibian, California tiger salamander, that does not exist in the city, or at least has not been known to exist. 2 reptiles, western pond turtle and giant garter snake. I believe we have the occurrence of western pond turtle, at least in one location in the city. Giant garter snake, while it looks like we could have upland habitat because of our canals and our main drain, there hasn't been any sighting of one in our city that we know of. The closest would be on the western side of the Yolo bypass. We do have several birds, though. Swainson's hawk, western yellow-billed cuckoo, western burrowing owl, least bell's vero, bank swallow, tricolored blackbird, and white-tailed kite. So of the 12 covered species here, about half have been known to occur or exist in our city right now. So here is the covered species occurrences, and I'll.
Can I interrupt
Sure.
with a question on the last slide? So for purposes of this plan, I recognize that all of these listed species may not currently be existed or cited in West Sacramento, but are we covered by all of
Yes.
them as a permittee still?
Yes,
So if someone were to claim a sighting or a habitat were to move over time into the area, we would be covered by that item?
correct.
Okay, thank you.
So here's a map showing the occurrences of the covered species, and I'll try to walk you through these. This is a little small, I realize. So the black diamond is the California tiger salamander, and you'll note that those are occurring more up in the very northern part of the county. I believe there's one occurrence down here by the city of Davis. Swainson's hawk is the most prevalent, so that's the yellow circle with the black bird in it. You can see that that is pretty much spread all over the crosshatched area of the proposed conservation reserve area. The bank swallow is sort of the pinkish purple circle. We don't have any known occurrences of those. Those are primarily along Cache Creek in this corridor here. And then there are some also over along the Sacramento River to the north of our city. Burrowing owl is the orange circle with the black bird in it. We do have a couple up in the north area around the UP main line, and then also in the bypass over to the west of our city. The next one is giant garter snake, which is the square. And you'll note there's no squares in our area, but there are some. There's one over in here, a known occurrence, and then there's quite a bit right in here in the bypass between us and Davis and Woodland. Least Bell's Vero, that's the green circle. We do have a couple of occurrences of those in the north area, and then just to the west of us in the bypass here. Then the palmate bract bird's beak, the plant, you'll note that is right in here and around Woodland. Tricolored blackbird, we have a known occurrence in and around the port. Valley elderberry longhorn beetle is the circle, kind of a rosish color, I guess. We do have a few occurrences, Southport here, kind of central Southport, and then up in the north area around the rivers. Western pond turtle is this symbol here, and this one is tough, but I think it's overlapped, but I believe we do have one occurrence. And I can't remember, it's hard to see if it's up here or if there's one down in Southport. Western yellow-billed cuckoo, we do not have any known occurrences in our city. There is one south of us, down near the Clarksburg area. White-tailed kite is primarily around the Davis area and the bypass, although our history has shown that we have had white-tailed kite in the city. Prior environmental documents do document that there was at least a couple pair in and around the port, the state streets in Arlington Oak, but they haven't been found in quite some time. So we're hoping they come back.
I think we've seen them.
So that's sort of the spread and of the occurrences, and that's why there was kind of a decision made to focus on this as our conservation area, given where development's going to occur and where the concentration of the species are. It's not to say that this area will be ignored, it's just that this area should be essentially avoided and left more in its natural community state. Any questions before I move on? Oops. So one of the environmental policies, and this was a shift from about 3 years ago, when we first started when we got the first administrative draft, it noticed that what we got was a compilation of a bunch of species and habitat land covers, but there didn't seem to be connectivity. And at the advisory committee level, that was brought up several times. And so that's a significant change in this draft compared to the first administrative draft. There was a complete shift on focusing on the connectivity between the species, how they move. And so there were corridors that are emphasized and mentioned in the plan, and so there will be conservation focused in this area. So there's the Cache Creek corridor is one of the corridors of significance. There is Pewta Creek corridor. There is the Yellow Bypass corridor. And there's also the Sacramento River corridor. And that's one of the environmental utilities, or the Environment and Utilities Commission weighed in on that on Monday, and they wanted to emphasize that this is a very important environmental policy in the plan, and they're glad to see it's there, and they want to make sure it's maintained. So the next two slides are a couple of figures from Chapter 4, which is really getting into the meat of what the policies that the Planning Commission need to really look at, and I'm looking for feedback on. And that is, what the benefits of this plan and what it means to our development projects and what it means to our public projects and our process. The prior Ag and Natural Resources Commission back in 2013 and the City Council, when we first brought the first administrative draft to them, there was a big question about how much value a plan like this would bring to the city. And, we're spending we're contributing as a member agency about $160,000 a year to this plan, to the development of this plan, for the costs that are not covered by grants. So the majority of it's grant funded, but we're funding the non-reimbursable stuff. But that's still a lot of money for our city, especially during the time when it was an economic, we were in a little bit of an economic downturn. And so there was the city council had asked for feedback on, is it worth it? And the commission at that time and the city council finally determined that, yeah, it's worth it to keep going, it's worth it to keep putting this in. And the reasons why they did that was they said that being a part of this plan and having a permit would provide streamlining. There would be known fees for the projects as well as the city. There would be known requirements for what's going to be expected if there is an impact to a species or a habitat cover. There's also known timelines, and it would also be a process that then we could deal more with at our local level, as opposed to having to submit to the federal wildlife agency or the state wildlife agency. Without that, they said, we're going to have to keep negotiating every time a project comes forth. And that, we don't have that extra layer of protection if one of our environmental documents gets challenged over a potential take. So this, they felt, gave us a little extra protection for both our projects and also for the development community. Recently, Supervisor Villegas at a Yolo County Board of Supervisors meeting also said that there are potential community benefits from partnerships with the Lower Pewta Creek Coordinating Committee and the Cache Creek Resources Management Plan that will result in restoration and protection of important riparian habitat combined with passive recreation. And that he felt there may be similar opportunities along the Sacramento River, that we might be able to partner with these other groups who are already doing these types of activities along the Pewta Creek and Cache Creek, and maybe do some similar things in the city along our Sacramento River. So that was also noted as a potential added benefit. So if this plan is adopted and permitted by the wildlife agencies. Yes.
Charlene, just a quick question before you move forward. You mentioned the streamlining the permit process. What was it like before, as far as the experience?
So before, or even right now,
Oh, yes. right now.
I'll give you an example from one of our own projects, the Bridge District 2014 plan. So in the Bridge District, we were doing all the infrastructure back in 2012, 2013. And we had a few species, nesting birds. We had Swainson's hawk nesting in the trees along the river. We had a couple of hawks. Those were pretty much, we just had to kind of plan our construction around their nesting season and have a biologist on the site every day construction was going on, watching the birds to make sure that they weren't stressed. We also had a valley elderberry bush, and it was right where our sewer pump station and force main needed to go. And we didn't have any other place that we could move it because we had to tie into the existing facilities right by it. So we submitted to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife for a take of that single bush. There was no evidence of beetles on it. We submitted, and the take would be we were going to actually relocate it. But with that type of relocation, there still could be some uncertainty of whether it would be a successful relocation. So there is somewhat considered a take. So we submitted it along with our consultant, the permit to take and relocate the bush. After 8 months and checking in monthly, they still had not been able to even look at our request. And at that point, we were on a critical schedule because the Prop 1C grant had an immovable deadline for delivery of the infrastructure. Okay. And our contractor was saying, we have to do this. We can't wait anymore. We need to finish the sewer. And so at that point, we went back to the city council, told them, we talked, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife said they couldn't get to it. They were understaffed. and they just said, basically, you need to avoid it. That's the only way you're going to deliver your project on time, is to avoid it. So we returned to the city council. We had to ask for an additional $250,000 because we had to bore underneath that bush. So it cost us $250,000. We lost 8 months, but we were able to gain it back. The contractor works a lot of overtime, but we got it back and we delivered the project on time. But it could have been a significant impact. So that's one example.
Very good example, thank you.
So under this plan, if it's approved and we are a permittee under the plan, how it would work for public projects is, since we are the permittee, we would look at our own project and say, is this a covered activity as defined under the plan? And if we say yes, then we would look at the land cover mapping, so we'll be provided the GIS layers so that we can go in and look at where the project's located, see what land cover types it might be disturbing. And then if we determine that it's disturbing, or it's not disturbing any special land cover types, such as riparian habitat, riverine habitat along the river, or wetlands, those are the two special land cover types we have in our city, then it would just be the base fee of the acreage we're disturbing. And so that base fee currently with this plan in its size is 10,000, where'd my number go? It's on another slide, I guess. It's a little over 10,000 an acre is the base fee. Now that covers all 12 species that we've talked about. Currently, if we impact any Swainson's hawk foraging habitat, just Swainson's hawk, our projects are paying $8,660 an acre. So yes, the fee is a little bit higher, but we're getting protection over 12 species instead of just one. So on a public project, the fee would be paid, if the public project requires a Section 7 consultation, and that's kind of in the middle of this slide here, then there's still a consultation that has to occur with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NIMS. But what they will do is they will look at the project and say, is the project consistent with the adopted YOLO Habitat Conservation and Natural Communities plan? And if they say, yes, it is, then it just goes right back here and we finish the process, fees are paid, and we move on. As always with any project, even though we have the plan in place, the permit in place, and we could take species, there will still be an emphasis to try to avoid or minimize the takes. Even though the fee's in place and we have the right, we could go that path, there's quite a bit of discussion in this plan about measures to try to avoid or minimize whenever possible. So that's sort of the public side. The private side is similar. It doesn't have the Section 7 in it. How it would flow for private projects is the applicant would come to us and say, we believe our project is a covered activity. We, as the city and a permittee, would evaluate whether or not we agree with them. So we have discretion over that. If we determine it's not a covered activity, then we can refer it to the JPA. The JPA can decide whether or not, and there's what we call a special participating entity. So covered activities, and there's also covered entities, right? So we're a covered entity. WSAFCA is a covered entity. If PG&E came to us, they're not a covered entity, but they could be. But they'd have to get permission from the JPA. They'd have to be designated as a special participating entity. UC Davis is similar. They too have decided they would maybe participate in this plan as a special participating entity. So that requires JPA, the JPA to weigh in on that. But if we determine that, number one, it's a development, we're going to extend our permittee status to them, Then we go through the same thing. We conduct the land cover survey for whatever activity they're going to do. We determine what area they're disturbing and what fee it would apply to. So if they're, say if it's just Yarborough down in Southwest Village, most likely it's going to be just the base fee per acre. If it's Seaway and they're wanting to encroach into that wetland, now we're looking at, okay, you might have to pay the base fee for the areas outside of that wetland area, but if you get into that wetland area, now you're going to pay a little over $60,000 an acre for whatever you disturb there. And the reason why the wetland fee is so high, or the riverine riparian fee is so high, is because those areas are much more costly to restore and conserve. And so that's why the fee is so much higher. And again, there are avoidance and minimization measures that we will work with the development community. And given that the development community is so fee-focused, most of the time when we have these, we see that they try to apply avoidance and minimization measures before they even submit to us. So a lot of the review of development projects with respect to habitat impacts will be conducted within our city unless we want to refer it to the JPA, or if a developer doesn't agree with our determination, then they can appeal it to the JPA. And then the JPA would then look at the determination. So there are appeal processes too. But that contrasted with what happens now, now they pay the fee for the Swainson's Huck. That mitigates that. Any other species or land cover types they're disturbing, they have to go and submit for permits with the state and the federal wildlife agencies. And that goes on a separate track. Any questions on how the plan, if it's approved, would be implemented and compared to where we're at right now? It's the implementation of this plan, or this plan, the way it's organized, is quite similar to other existing habitat conservation and NCCP plans. So I haven't found anything in this plan that appears to be unique or that would make us stand out compared to other plans as far as how the process would work. Okay. So, next steps.